I am unlikely to be able to formulate instructions, and there is no purpose in this, because all instructions, advice, questions are given only so that they are not followed later. This formula is well known to everyone. I will allow myself to express my opinion on what is happening in the world, where it is, and what is the role of our country, and how we see the prospects for development. The Valdai International Discussion Club has indeed gathered for the 22nd time, and such meetings have simply become a good, kind tradition. Discussions on the Valdai platforms give the opportunity for all parties to assess the situation around the world, which is called to record changes, to contemplate them. Undoubtedly, the strong feature of the Valdai Club is the desire and ability of its participants to look beyond the banal, obvious to all of us, to explore the agenda imposed on us by the global information space, especially since the internet brings its own good, bad, but sometimes so difficult to understand, to try to ask its own original questions, its own vision of the processes, to open the curtain that hides tomorrow. This is not easy, but sometimes it works, including on the Valdai platform with you. But we have already noted more than once that we live in a time when everything is changing, and changing very quickly. I would say it is changing radically. Of course, none of us can fully predict the future, but this does not free us from the duty to be ready for everything that can happen. Practically, as time and recent events show, we need to be ready for anything. The responsibility of everyone in such periods of history is especially great, both for their own fate, for the fate of the country and the whole world, and the stakes here are extremely high. The annual report of the Valdai Club is dedicated, as has just been said, to the problems of the multipolar, polycentric world. This topic has been on the agenda for a long time, but now it deserves special attention. I agree with the organizers. In fact, the multipolarity that has already developed defines the frameworks in which the state operates. But I will try to answer the question of what the peculiarities of today's situation are. First of all, it is a much more open, one might even say, creative space for foreign policy. Virtually nothing is predetermined in advance. Everything can go differently. Much depends on the accuracy, reliability, degree of endurance, thoughtfulness of the actions of each member of the international community. And in this vast space, of course, it is easy to get lost, to lose your bearings, which, as we see, happens quite often. Secondly, the multipolar space is very dynamic. Changes occur quickly, as I have already said, and sometimes suddenly, just all at once. And of course, it is very difficult to prepare for them, and sometimes it is impossible to predict them. You have to react instantly, as they say, in real time. Thirdly, what is important is that this space is much more democratic. It opens the way for a large number of political and economic players. Perhaps there has never been such a number of countries in the world that influence or are striving to influence the most important regional and global processes. Next, the cultural, historical, civilizational specificity of different countries plays a greater role than ever before. It is necessary to look for points of contact and coincidence of interests. No one is ready to play by the rules set by someone alone and somewhere far away. As one very famous Shansani sang, "There, beyond the fogs, or there, beyond the oceans." In this regard, fifthly, any decisions are possible only on the basis of agreements that suit all the parties concerned, or the overwhelming majority. Otherwise, there will be no viable solution at all, but only loud phrases and a fruitless game of ambitions. Thus, harmony and balance are needed to achieve results. Finally, the possibilities and dangers of a multipolar world cannot be separated from each other. Of course, the weakening of the dictatorship, which was distinguished by the previous period, the expansion of space and freedom for all, is undoubtedly a good thing. At the same time, it is much more difficult to find and establish this very strong balance, which in itself is a clear and extreme risk. Such a situation on the planet, which I have tried to outline quite briefly, is a qualitatively new phenomenon. International relations are undergoing a cardinal transformation. Paradoxically, multipolarity has become a direct consequence of attempts to establish and preserve global hegemony. The response of the international system and history itself is an obsessive desire to build everyone into one hierarchy, at the top of which would be the countries of the West. The failure of such an initiative was only a matter of time, which we have always talked about, by the way. By historical standards, this has happened, and it happened quite quickly. 35 years ago, when it seemed that the confrontation of the Cold War was coming to an end, we were hoping for the advent of an era of genuine cooperation. It seemed that there were no ideological and other obstacles that would prevent us from jointly solving common problems for humanity and regulating and resolving inevitable disputes and conflicts based on mutual respect and consideration of everyone's interests. Let me make a small historical digression here. Our country, striving to liquidate the basis for a bloc confrontation, to create a common space for security, has twice declared its readiness to join NATO. The first time was in 1954, back in the days of the USSR, and the second time was during the US President's visit to Moscow. I spoke about this in 2000, when we also discussed this topic, and both times we actually received a rejection from the threshold. I repeat, we were ready for joint work, for non-linear steps in the sphere of security and global stability. But our Western colleagues turned out to be not ready to free themselves from the captivity of geopolitical and historical stereotypes, from simplified, schematic pictures of the world. I also spoke publicly with Mr. Clinton. With President Clinton, he said, you know, it is interesting. I think it is possible. And then in the evening, he said, I consulted with my people. It is unreal. Now it is unreal. And when is it real? That's it. It's all gone. In short, we all had a real chance at another positive vector of development of international relations. But the top, alas, took a different approach. Western countries did not resist the temptation of absolute power. Well, the temptation is so serious. In order to resist this temptation, we needed to have such a historical perspective in mind and a good level of training, including intellectual training, historical training. Those who made the decision then, apparently, simply did not have such training. Yes, the power of the United States and its allies at the end of the 20th century reached its peak. But there will be no force that would be able to rule the world, dictate to everyone what and how to do, how to breathe. Well, there have never been such attempts, but they all ended in failure. At the same time, it should be noted that the so-called liberal world order seemed acceptable, even convenient. Yes, the hierarchy limits the possibilities of those who are not on the upper floors of the pyramid, if you allow me, at the top of the food chain, but live somewhere down there at its base. But such a position takes away a significant share of responsibility from them. What are the rules? Just accept the offered conditions, integrate into the system, get the share you deserve, and be happy. Do not think about anything. Others will think and decide for you. And no matter what they say, no matter who tries to hide their now, it was really so. And the experts who sit here perfectly remember and understand all this. Some self-satisfied believed in the right to teach everyone else. Others preferred to play along, to be an obedient object of trade and exchanges in order to avoid unnecessary problems and get some, albeit small, but confident bonus for it. And by the way, there are enough of such politicians in the old parts of the world, in Europe. Those who objected tried to defend their interests and rights, considered at best, so to speak, as weirdos. They hinted, anyway, nothing will work out for you. At best, accept it. Admit that you are nothing against our forces, an empty place. Well, with all the disruptive, self-proclaimed world grants, they were brought up without hesitation, thereby making everyone understand that resistance is useless. This did not lead to anything good. None of the world's problems were solved, but constantly new ones are added. The global governance institutes created in the previous era either worked or did not work at all. To a significant extent, lost their effectiveness either way. And no matter how much potential a particular country or group of countries has accumulated, every power still has a limit. Well, the Russian side, the audience, knows we have such a saying in our people: there is no reception against a break, except for another break, and it always appears. You see, this is the essence of what is happening in the world. It always appears. In addition, an attempt to control everything and everyone around creates a re-stress, and it beats on the internal instability, causing citizens of countries that are trying to play this role of grants, the citizens of these countries, to raise legal questions. Why do we need all this? Some time ago, I heard something like this from our American colleagues who said, "We have gained peace, but lost America itself." I would like to ask the question, was it worth it? And did we gain it at all? And in societies led by the Western European states, the obvious rejection of the excessive ambitions of the political elite of these countries is growing. The barometer of public opinion shows this everywhere. The establishment does not want to concede power, goes for direct deception of its own citizens, oppresses the situation on the external contour, goes for any tricks inside its countries, more often on the verge or even beyond the law. But it will not be possible to infinitely turn democratic electoral procedures into farce, to manipulate the will of the people. This is how it was in Romania. Let's not go into details. This happens in many countries. In some countries, they are trying to ban their political opponents who are already gaining more legitimacy, more confidence in the voters. We know this. It happened in the Soviet Union. Do you remember the songs of Vysotsky? That's it. They even banned the military parade. Soon, everything will be banned to hell. But this does not work. The bans do not work. And the will of people, the will of the citizens of these countries, is simple. Let the leaders of the countries deal with the problems of the citizens. Take care of their safety and quality of life, but do not chase the chimeras. In the United States, where the demand of people led to a rather radical change in the political vector, this is a clear example. Well, for other countries, it can be said that the examples are, as you know, contagious. Submission of the majority to the minority, inherent in international relations during the domination of Western countries, gives way to a multilateral, more cooperative approach, based on the agreements of the leading players and taking into account the interests of all. This, of course, does not guarantee absolute harmony and non-conflict. The interests of the countries never completely coincide, and the whole history of international relations is, of course, a struggle for their implementation. But the fundamentally new world atmosphere, the tone that is increasingly set by the countries of the world's majority, allows us to hope that all players, one way or another, will have to take into account the interests of each other when working out solutions to regional and global problems. After all, in essence, no one can achieve their goals alone, in isolation from others. The world, despite the exacerbation of conflicts, the crisis, the previous models of globalization, the fragmentation of the world economy, remains whole, interconnected, and interdependent. We know this from our own experience. You know how much effort our opponents have made in recent years to, roughly speaking, kick Russia out of the world system, drive us into political, cultural, information isolation, and economic autarky. In terms of the number and volume of punitive measures introduced against us, which are shamefully called sanctions, Russia is an absolute record holder in world history. 30 or maybe even more restrictions. So what? Have you achieved your goal? I think those present here do not need to explain that these efforts have suffered a complete collapse. Russia showed the world the highest degree of stability, the ability to withstand the strongest external pressure, which could break not only a single country, but a whole coalition of states. And of course, we feel legal pride in Russia, in our citizens, and in our armed forces. But I want to say more than that. It turned out that Russia simply does not let go of the very world system from which they wanted to drive us out. Because Russia needs it as a very important part of the common balance. And not only because of its territory, population, defense, technological and industrial potential, because of its useful minerals, although, of course, everything I have just listed is very, very important. These are the most important factors. But above all, because the world balance cannot be built without Russia. Not economically, not strategically, not culturally, not logistically, not at all. I think that those who have tried to destroy all this have just been convinced of this. Some, however, persistently hope to achieve their goal, to cause Russia, as they say, a strategic defeat. Well, if they do not see the validity of this plan and persist, well, all the same. I hope that life will show, and it will reach the most stubborn people. It seems that they have already made a lot of noise, threatened, tried to make the people of Russia suffer, as they themselves said. They chose the right words. They were not ashamed. They wanted to make the people of Russia suffer. They made plans, one fantastic and another. It seems to me that it is time to calm down, look around, understand the reality, and somehow build relations in a completely different direction. We also understand that the polycentric world is very dynamic. It seems fragile and unstable because it is impossible to fix the position of things forever, to determine the distribution of forces for a long time. After all, there are a lot of participants in the processes, and these forces are the most asymmetrical, complex. Everyone has their own winning sides and competitive advantages, which in each case create a unique combination and composition. Today's world is an extremely complex, multi-aspect system, and in order to describe it correctly, to comprehend it, there are not enough simple laws of logic, the cause of the consequential connections arising from this pattern. Here you need a philosophy of complexity, something similar to quantum mechanics, which is wiser, more complex than classical physics. However, it is precisely thanks to this complexity of the world that the overall compatibility, in my opinion, still tends to increase. After all, a linear, one-sided solution is impossible, and a non-linear, multi-sided solution requires a very serious, professional, unpretentious, creative, at times, non-standard diplomacy. Therefore, I am convinced that we will witness a kind of renaissance, the revival of high diplomatic art, and its essence is in the ability to engage in dialogue and negotiate with neighbors and like-minded people, and, what is no less important, but more difficult, with opponents. It is in this spirit, the spirit of 21st century diplomacy, that new institutes are developing. These are the expanding BRICS community and organizations of the largest regions, for example, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Eurasia, and more compact, but no less important, regional associations. There are many of them around the world now. I will not list them all. You know about it. All these new structures are different, but they are united by the most important qualities. They do not function according to the principle of hierarchy, subordination to someone to the most important person. They are not against someone, they are for themselves. I repeat once again, the modern world needs agreements, not imposing someone's will. Hegemony and any hegemony simply will not cope with the scale of the task. Ensuring international security in these conditions is an extremely complex and pressing issue. The growing number of players with different goals and political cultures, with their own traditions, all this global complexity makes the development of approaches to the security issue a much more complicated and simple task. However, it opens up new opportunities for all of us. Block tricks, deliberately programmed for confrontation, are certainly now anachronistic, meaningless. We see, for example, how hard our European neighbors are trying to patch up the cracks in the buildings of Europe. However, they want to overcome the split, to strengthen the collapsed unity, to which they were previously bound, not by effective solutions to internal problems, but by blowing up the image of the enemy. This is an old example, but the point is that people in these countries see and understand everything. That is why they take to the streets, despite the pressure, as I have already said, of the situation on the external contour and the search for this enemy. Moreover, they are recreating the enemy of Russia, which was invented centuries ago. Most people in Europe cannot understand why they are so afraid of Russia, that in order to confront it, they need to tighten their belts more and more and forget about their own interests, simply give them up and clearly harm themselves. But the ruling elites of the United Europe continued to impose hysteria. It turns out that the war with the Russians is almost on the verge. They repeat this nonsense, this mantra over and over again. To be honest, I sometimes look at what they say, but they cannot believe it. They cannot believe what they say, that Russia is going to attack NATO. It is impossible to believe this, but they persuade their own people. What kind of people are they? They are either very incompetent, if they really believe, so it is impossible to believe this nonsense, or they are simply disorderly, because they themselves do not believe it, and their citizens are trying to convince them. But what other options are there? To be honest, I just want to say, go to sleep, sleep quietly, finally deal with your own problems. See what is happening on the streets of European cities, what is happening to the economy, industry, European culture and identity, with huge debts and an increasing crisis of social security systems, which have come out of control of migration, the growth of violence, including political radicalization of left-wing, ultra-liberal, Russian marginal societies. Pay attention to how Europe is sliding to the periphery of global competition. We are well aware of how all the threats to Russia's aggressive plans, which Europe itself intimidates with, are sucked out of our fingers. I have just said this, but self-indulgence is a dangerous thing, and we simply cannot ignore what is happening. We have no right to do this for the sake of ensuring our own security. I repeat, our own defense and security. Therefore, we are closely monitoring the increasing forces of militarization in Europe. Is it just words, or is it time for us to take countermeasures? We hear about it, and you know about it. The FRG, for example, says that the German army should again be the most powerful in Europe. Well, good. We are listening carefully to what is being said. I think that no one has any doubts that such countermeasures by Russia will not make you wait long. The threat of retaliation seems, to put it mildly, very convincing. It will be very convincing. It is the retaliation. We have never initiated a military confrontation. It is pointless, unnecessary, and simply absurd. It leads to real problems and challenges. And society will sooner or later ask its leaders for their hopes, desires, and needs to be ignored by these elites and their countries. But if someone still has a desire to compete with us in the military sphere, as we say, free will, let them try. Russia has proven more than once that when there is a threat to our security, peace and tranquility of our citizens, our sovereignty and statehood, we respond quickly. No need to provoke. There was no case where, in the end, it did not end badly for the provocateur himself. There is no need to wait for exceptions in the future. There will be none. Our history has shown that weakness is unacceptable because it creates a temptation, an illusion that some issue can be resolved with force. Russia will never lose its weakness and indecision. Let those remember this who we interfere with by the very fact of our existence. Those who dream of us being defeated strategically. By the way, speaking of those who actively talked about this, as we say, there are no others, but those far away. Where are these activists? There are so many objective problems related to factors of natural, technogenic, and social nature in the world that it is unacceptable to spend forces and energy on artificial ones. There are invented contradictions. It is unacceptable, deplorable, and simply stupid. International security is now such a multifaceted and indivisible phenomenon that no geopolitical valuable demarcation can break it. Only meticulous all-round work, with the involvement of various partners and support for creative approaches, can solve the complex security issues of the 21st century. There are no more or less important elements in it. Everything that is particularly important is solved only in the complex. Our country has consistently defended the principle of indivisibility and security. I have repeatedly said that the security of some cannot be ensured by others. Otherwise, there is no security at all, not for anyone. We have failed to achieve this principle. The euphoria and boundless thirst for power of those who, after the Cold War, considered themselves victors, as I have said more than once, led to the desire to impose unilateral and subjective ideas on everyone about security. This, in fact, became the true root cause of not only the Ukrainian, but also many other acute conflicts of the 21st century. As a result, as we have warned, no one feels safe today at all. It is time to return to the roots, to correct the mistakes made. But the indivisibility of security today, if we compare it with the end of the 1980s and the beginning of the 1990s, is an even more complex phenomenon. We are not only talking about the military-political balance and mutual interests. Humanity's security depends on its ability to respond to challenges caused by natural disasters, technological developments, new and rapid social, demographic, and information processes. All this is interconnected, and changes occur to a significant extent on their own. Often, as I have already said, unpredictable in their own internal logic and laws, and sometimes even, let me say, beyond the will and expectations of people. Humanity risks being superfluous in such a situation, simply an observer of processes that it will no longer be able to manage. What is a systemic challenge for all of us, and an opportunity for all of us to work together constructively? There are no ready answers here, but I believe that in order to solve global problems, we must first of all approach them without ideological commitment, without excessive pathos, in the spirit of, I will explain everything to you now as it should be. And secondly, it is important to realize that this is a truly common, indivisible matter that requires the joint work of all countries and peoples. Every culture and civilization must make their own contribution, because, I repeat, no one knows the correct answer in terms of individuality. It can only be born in terms of joint constructive search, unification, and not separation of efforts and national experience of different states. I repeat once again that there have been and will be conflicts and clashes of interests. Of course, there will always be. The question is how to resolve them. The multipolar world, as I said today, is the return of classical diplomacy, when attention, mutual respect, not coercion, is needed for settlement. Classical diplomacy was able to take into account the position of different subjects of international life, the very complexity of the concert of various states. However, at one time, Western diplomacy replaced it with monologues, endless teachings and order. Instead of resolving conflict situations, specific interests began to be crushed, considering the interests of everyone else unworthy of attention. Should we be surprised that instead of resolving, there was only exacerbation of conflicts, up to their transition to a bloody armed phase and a humanitarian catastrophe? We should act in such a way as not to solve a single problem. There are countless examples over the past 30 years. One of them is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which, according to the recipes of Western one-sided diplomacy, cannot be resolved by roughly ignoring history, tradition, identity, and culture of the people living there. Similarly, the situation in the Middle East, which on the contrary is rapidly degrading, should be stabilized. We are now getting to know President Trump's initiatives in more detail, but it seems to me that there may be some light at the end of the tunnel. A terrible example is the Ukrainian tragedy. It is a pain for Ukrainians and Russians, for all of us. The causes of the Ukrainian conflict are well known to anyone who took the trouble to inquire about the prehistory of its current, most acute stage. I will not repeat it. I am sure that those present in this hall know them well and know my position on this issue, and I have formulated it many times. It is well known that those who encouraged, promoted, armed Ukraine, trained it for Russia, and for decades nurtured there the rampant nationalism and neo-Nazism. To be honest, I am sorry for my tone, did not want to care only about the Russian interests, but also about the actual Ukrainian interests of the people of this country. They do not feel sorry for this people. This people is a consumable material for them, for the globalists, expansionists in the West, and their henchmen in Kyiv. The results of reckless amateurism are obvious. There is nothing to talk about. You can ask yourself another question. Could it have been otherwise? We know, I will return to what President Trump said. He said that if he were in power, this could have been avoided. I agree with this. Indeed, this could have been avoided if the administration, the then Biden administration, had worked differently. If Ukraine had not been turned into a destructive tool in someone else's hands, if the North Atlantic Bloc had not been used for this, which is moving towards our borders, if Ukraine had preserved its independence, its real sovereignty. And another question, how should the two-sided Russian-Ukrainian problems, which were the objective consequence of the collapse of a huge country and complex geopolitical transformations, be resolved? By the way, I think that the Russian Soviet Union, this was connected with the position of the then leadership of Russia, will get rid of any ideological confrontation in the hope that now, when everything is over with communism, there will be brotherhood. No, nothing like that. There are other factors here, geopolitical interests, and it turned out that ideological contradictions have nothing to do with it. How can they be resolved in a polycentric world? Yes, and how would the situation in Ukraine be resolved? I think that if there was a multipolarity, its different poles would try to adjust the situation around the Ukrainian conflict, which is called on itself, to those potential zones of tension, breakdowns that exist in their own regions, and then the collective decision would be much more responsible and weighted. The basis of the adjustment would be the understanding that all participants in this difficult situation have their own interests. They are justified by objective and subjective circumstances, and they cannot be ignored. The aspiration of all countries to ensure the security of development is legal. This naturally applies to Ukraine, Russia, and all our neighbors. It is the states of the region that should have the main say in the creation of a regional system, and it is they who have the maximum chance to agree on an acceptable interaction model for all, because it directly concerns them. This is their life interest. For other countries, this situation in Ukraine is a map in a different, much larger game, and in their own game. And, as a rule, it is not even related to the specific problems of the country in general, in this case, this particular country and the countries involved in the conflict. This is just a reason and a way to solve their geopolitical tasks, to expand the control zone and to make a little money in the war. So they came to us, to the threshold of the NATO infrastructure. For years, they have been looking at the tragedy of Donbass, at the genocide, in fact, and at the destruction of Russian people in our original historical territories, which began in 2014 after a bloody coup d'etat in Ukraine. Contrasting this behavior, which Europe and the United States have been demonstrating until recently under the current administration, is the behavior of the world's majority. They refuse to take someone's side. They really seek to help establish a just world. We are grateful to all the states that have made sincere efforts over the past few years to find a way out of this situation. These are our partners, the founders of BRICS, China, India, Brazil, UAE, Belarus, and, by the way, North Korea. These are our friends in the Arab Islamic world as a whole, primarily Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, Iran, Serbia, Hungary, Slovakia, in Europe, and many other countries, African and Latin American. Unfortunately, we have not yet been able to stop the hostilities, but the responsibility for this lies not with the majority for the fact that we have not been able to stop them, but with the minority, primarily in Europe, which is constantly escalating the conflict. In my opinion, there is no other goal for today. Nevertheless, I think that goodwill will prevail. And in this sense, there is no doubt. I think that changes are taking place in Ukraine as well. Gradually, we see this. No matter how people are brainwashed, changes are taking place in the public consciousness and in the vast majority of countries in the world. In fact, the phenomenon of the world majority is a new phenomenon in international life. I would also like to say a few words on this. What is its essence? It is that the vast majority of countries in the world are focused on the implementation of their own civilizational interests, the main of which is their balanced, progressive development. It would seem that this is natural, it has always been so, but in the previous era, the understanding of these very interests was often distorted by unhealthy ambitions, selfishness, the influence of expansionist ideologies. Now, the vast majority of countries in the world are aware of their true interests, but the most important thing is that they feel the strength and confidence to defend these interests despite the external influence. I will add that by promoting and defending their own interests, they are ready to work with their partners, that is, to convert international relations, diplomacy, integration into the source of their growth, progress, and development. Relations within the world, majority are a prototype of political practices that are necessary and effective in a polycentric world. This is pragmatism and realism, the rejection of block philosophy, the absence of rigid assigned obligations to someone, models where there are senior and junior partners. Finally, the ability to combine interests which are not always coincidental, but mostly do not contradict each other. The absence of antagonism becomes the main principle. Now, a new wave of actual decolonization is gaining strength. When former colonies, understanding statehood in addition to statehood, gain political, economic, cultural, and worldview sovereignty. In this context, another anniversary is significant. We have just celebrated the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. This is not only the most representative universal political structure of the world. This is a symbol of the spirit of cooperation, alliance, even a combat brotherhood that helped in the first half of the last century to unite efforts to fight the most terrible evil in history, merciless machines of extermination and enslavement. We are proud of the decisive role in this common victory. The victory over Nazism belongs, of course, to the Soviet Union. We just need to look at the number of victims, all the participants of the anti-Hitler coalition, and everything will immediately become clear. That's all. The UN is, of course, a legacy of victory in World War II, the most successful experience of the creation of an international organization in which it is possible to solve pressing world problems. Now, you can often hear that the UN system is paralyzed and is in crisis. This has become a commonplace. Some even claim that it has come to life. It should at least be radically reformed. Yes, of course, there are a lot of problems in the work of the UN, a lot, but there is nothing better than the UN. This should also be acknowledged. The problem is not in the UN, in fact. After all, its potential opportunities are very large. The question is, in fact, how we ourselves, the most united and now unfortunately divided nations, use all these opportunities. There is no doubt that the UN is facing difficulties. Like any organization today, it needs to adapt to changing realities. However, in the process of reforming it, it is fundamentally important not to lose, not to distort the main meaning of the construction. And not only that, which was laid down when the United Nations was created, but also what was gained in the process of its complex development. It is worth remembering that since 1945, the number of UN member states has increased almost fourfold. The organization, which arose on the initiative of several major countries over decades of existence, has not simply expanded. It has absorbed many different cultures and political traditions. Its diversity has become truly multipolar long before the world became like this. The potential embedded in the UN system is just beginning to open up. And I am sure that in the coming new era, it will happen, and it will happen faster. In other words, now the countries of the world majority naturally form a convincing majority as part of the United Nations. This means that its structure and governance should be brought in line with this fact, which, by the way, will correspond much more to the basic principles of democracy. I will not deny that there is no unanimity now regarding how the world should be arranged, on what principles it should be based in the coming years and decades. We have entered a long period of search, in many ways, a movement by touch. In our view, these are, above all, values that have matured in national cultures over the centuries. Culture and history, ethical and religious norms, the influence of geography and space, are the main elements from which civilizations are born. Special communities that have been created over the centuries and that determine national self-awareness, values and traditions are all that serve as guidelines that allow us not to get lost, to resist the storms of the stormy ocean of international life. Tradition is always a unique thing. Everyone has their own, and respecting traditions is the first and main condition for the successful development of international relations and solving emerging problems. The world has gone through attempts to unify, imposing all supposedly universal models that went against the cultural and ethical traditions of the majority of peoples. At one time, the Soviet Union was at fault for imposing its political system, but we know about it. To be honest, I don't think anyone will argue with that. Then the United States took over. Europe was very different, and in both cases, nothing worked out. The superficial, artificial, even more so imposed on the outside, does not last long, and those who respect their tradition, as a rule, do not interfere with someone else's. Now, in the face of international instability, special attention is drawn to our own foundation of development, which does not depend on international trends. And we see how countries and peoples address this very basis. This happens not only in the countries of the world's majority, but also in Western societies. If everyone is guided by this, engaging in themselves and not exchanging for unnecessary ambitions, it turns out that it is easier to find common ground with others. As an example, we can cite today's experience of Russia's interaction with the United States. As you know, our countries have many contradictions. Our views on many world problems do not coincide. For such large powers, this is normal, in fact, absolutely natural. The main thing is how to resolve these contradictions, how well they can be settled by the world. The current White House administration expresses its interests and desires directly. Sometimes, I think you will agree with me, sometimes directly and linearly, but without any unnecessary hypocrisy. It is always better to understand clearly what the interlocutor wants, what he is trying to achieve, than to try to guess the real meaning in a series of misunderstandings, ambiguous and foggy hints. We see that today's US administration is guided, first of all, by the interests of its own side, as it understands them. I believe this is a rational approach. But then, excuse me, Russia leaves behind the right to be guided by our national interests, one of which, by the way, is the restoration of full-scale relations with the United States. And no matter what the contradictions are, if we treat each other with respect, then the cake, even the toughest, most persistent, will still have the purpose of coming together. And this means that, in the end, mutually acceptable solutions are possible. Multipolarity, polycentrism, the reality that will be with us for a long time, how soon and how effectively we will be able to create a stable world order on its basis depends on each of us. And such an order, such a model in the modern world, is possible only as a result of joint efforts, the work in which everyone participates. I repeat, the times when a narrow group of the most powerful powers decided for the rest of the world how to live have gone irrevocably. This should be remembered by those who are nostalgic for colonial times, when it was customary to divide nations into those who are equal and those who are more equal. We are well aware of the phrase of Orwell. We, Russia, have never had such a Russian understanding of problems, such an attitude to other nations, to other cultures. Russia has never had and never will. For diversity, polyphony, a symphony of values, the world certainly looks gloomy when it is monotonous. Russia has fallen into a very turbulent and difficult fate. The formation of Russian statehood itself is a constant overcoming of colossal historical challenges. I do not want to say that other states developed in temperate conditions, of course not. But still, Russian experience is in many ways unique, as are the unique countries they have created. There is no claim to exclusivity or superiority in this. It is simply a statement of our identity. We have experienced numerous shocks, have given the world food for very different reflections, both negative and positive. But thanks to our historical baggage, we are better prepared for the complex, non-linear, ambiguous world situation that we all have to live in. In any trial, Russia has proven one thing. It was, is, and always will be.